Today, I thought it would be useful for us to talk about something that I get a lot of questions about on Twitter and is a topic that's probably near and dear to a lot of your hearts, which is how do you get a job in the video game industry? I'll start by saying that it's very highly dependent upon the discipline that you're interested in, but I'm going to go through all of the disciplines that I could think of and talk about them one by one. Then at the end, I will have some general advice for applying for a job, and we'll see how that goes. Before we get into it, I think you should ask yourself this question. Do you actually want to work in the video game industry? It certainly comes with a lot of challenges. It can have relatively brutal working conditions. It's a pretty immature industry, both in that it is young, but also because it is quite young, it can have pretty underdeveloped cultures. You certainly see in the news the consequence of not having mature cultures and the toxic work environments that have plagued the industry for its entire existence. It is improving slowly, and certainly if you are someone interested in entering into that fight, I for one would welcome you to come into the video game industry and help make things better. But that fight is going to be draining, and it may not be what you're looking for. So I think it's worth thinking about it seriously before you take that step. Don't get me wrong, this industry can be incredibly rewarding. The opportunity to work on something that is creative, that has an emotional impact on the people that use it, this can be much more rewarding than working in other software or technology fields. And you also have the opportunity to interact with the people that play your game, which is not something you can say about people who work at Twitter or Facebook. So the video game industry is certainly has both its positives and negatives. I just think you should come into this with your eyes open. To start with, I'm going to call out two very broad areas of focus, and I'll call them out separate from the departmental stuff because they are often defined in different ways at different companies. Both of these might be potentially an art job or a design job, depending on exactly where you are. So the first is UX, sometimes also called UI, but this is user experience. So this is the group of people focused on the interfaces and the way that the player interacts with the game and what they see and the information that's presented back to them. UX design has really only become a thing in video games in the last little while. Obviously, there have been UIs since the beginning of video games, but often they were done as afterthoughts, or they were implemented by an artist, or they were implemented by the programmer who built the system that underlies the UI. More recently, it's become apparent that there is a huge opportunity for improving this user experience, improving interfaces in your game to smooth out the way that players interact with your game. As a result, this is an excellent place to look for employment opportunities. I would say that basically every single studio is short at least one UI designer, possibly way more. And if you have the resume to get a job in this space, there will be lots of opportunities available for you. One thing I will say, if you have the training in user experience, that there are other companies like Amazon that are also hiring in this area. And for the most part, they pay a lot more than you are going to be able to get from a video game studio. So if you are really interested in interface design and user experience, this is a great field to go into because there are tons of opportunities, not just in the video game industry. The second general topic is cinematics, or cine. This can be broken into sort of two broad categories. There's cinematic animation and cinematic design. Not all studios have either of these. Some might only have cinematic animation, some might only have cinematic design. Others have neither. Cinematic animation are the people who basically make pre-rendered movies, or if not pre-rendered, they're animated outside of the game engine, and then the animation is laid on top of the characters within the game engine. This discipline, this skill set is very much like that used in 3D movies. It's about animation and movement, camera positioning, and those sorts of things. Probably if you're a cinematic animator, you are not modeling anything. You're probably relying on other parts of the team to provide the models, but you are going to be responsible for building entire scenes from the ground up. Cinematic design is a bit more rough and ready. So cinematic design, you are building scenes similar to cinematic animation, but your tool set is different. You are working entirely within the game engine using the animations and props and cameras that already exist. So it's much more like machinima than cinematic animation. Cinematic design often exists at studios like BioWare, which has a lot of storytelling to do and can't afford to hand animate every single cinematic in the entire game, or at places that have very small storytelling budgets. For both of these disciplines, my advice is build a portfolio. You're going to hear build a portfolio from me a whole bunch of times in this presentation, but the way that you're going to get hired in these spaces is by showing what you can do. If you build a lot of machinima, provide that as a portfolio. If they're looking for cinematic design and you've done some impressive things, that's going to get you a foot in the door. A lot of the things that you're going to need to be able to show off for cinematic design are going to be about the more cinematic nature of the craft. It's relatively easy to find someone that can kit bash a scene together. What's a little bit harder to find are people that have an eye for framing or timing or things that are a bit more about filmmaking. On the other hand, for cinematic animation, because you're tapping into the more traditionally trained parts of animation, here it's really about the quality of the portfolio itself in terms of all aspects of it. So broadly talking about art is almost entirely driven through portfolio. If you are applying for an art job, regardless of the subdiscipline, which we'll get into in a minute, you're going to want to make sure that you have something in your portfolio that is related to the job that you are applying for. If the job is looking for photorealistic science fiction and everything in your portfolio is cartoony and fantasy facing, it's going to be hard to get past that initial portfolio review. So you might need to tailor your portfolio a little bit for the jobs that you apply for to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward. So let's talk about the sub-disciplines within art. Concept art is actually something that's quite in demand right now because concept artists are the people that are going to essentially build the specifications for the art that's built by your outsourcers. For concept art, you're going to want mostly in your portfolio, mostly 2D drawings, and you want to show a wide variety of different things because a lot of what concept artists do isn't big, beautiful production pieces. It's the furniture design for this faction. So you're going to be drawing a chair and a bench and a desk and a table, all that are thematically appropriate to the Canary. So what you want in your portfolio is something that shows what you're capable of quality-wise, but also what you're capable of in terms of showing things that are easy to follow and also showing that you can keep things within a theme. The other thing that's important for concept art, but it's a little bit harder to bring across in your portfolio, is speed, because you are potentially making hundreds and hundreds of drawings. So the faster you are, the more successful you're going to be in this role. So if you have a way that you can show how fast you can be, then that's great. And if you're really fast, there is another job open for this kind of 2D artist that is gaining traction within the video game industry, which is storyboard artists. Now, storyboards are where you are very, very roughly sketching out the way that a cutscene is going to work, or even the way that gameplay or a section of the game is going to flow. And this is about being able to communicate emotion and intent with incredibly small amounts of drawing. It's a skill all its own. If you are capable of doing this sort of very sketch-based drawing, it is definitely worth including in your portfolio because storyboarding is gaining more and more traction within the video game industry. So there are jobs available for this kind of artist. Moving into 3D, level artists are the people that are building the actual levels where the game takes place. This is very difficult to outsource because there is a lot of back and forth between the level artist and the level designer. And as a result, this is a place where even as outsourcing increases, jobs remain pretty common for this discipline. Again, focus your portfolio on the job you're applying for. Level artists are in high demand, and there is, I think, a romanticism around character art. So if you like layouts, if you like architecture, this is definitely a place to focus your attention. Creature and character art is difficult because, as I said, it is, first of all, a place where a lot of people coming out of 3D art programs are wanting to get a job. So the pool is much bigger. But additionally, it is also something that is relatively easy to outsource. If you have good concept artists, then you can go to a much lower cost place like Russia or China and have your creatures made there. It's not that there aren't creature artists within studios, but in order to get a job in a studio in the West, your portfolio is going to need to be incredibly strong because you're competing against a lot of other people for not very many positions. Tech art is kind of a catch-all for all the technical focused aspects of art. This is where you are talking about helping profile and optimize models, or building shaders, or doing other things at the art level that require a more technical bent. Tech artists are always in high demand because it requires a cross-section of artistic ability as well as a technical bent. So not all artists are capable of working in this space. And as engines are quite complicated these days, there needs to be the touch of a technical artist on a lot of assets before they're able to go in the game. Not really sure what you want your portfolio to look like in the case of tech art, but if you have this bent, maybe it'll be a bit more obvious to you. A thing that's very related to tech art and arguably is essentially just a form of tech art is VFX, which similarly are in very high demand because VFX are about building these artistic particle systems and ways that communicate gameplay without causing the frame rate to rip itself apart. So it's a very technically focused part of the job. And like UX designers, it seems like every studio is short at least one VFX artist. So if you are interested in visual effects and have built some, definitely consider applying for a VFX position because this is something that is always in high demand across almost all studios. And I can sort of see, unlike the more general tech art position, how you would structure your portfolio to apply for such a job. Animation has not specialized to the same degree as art, but within this, you are going to want to have a portfolio with as much variety as you can. A lot of studios do a lot of motion capture these days, so if you have worked with motion capture and can provide proof of that, that would be great. If you've done any animation of things that cannot be easily motion captured, like quadrupeds or fantasy creatures, that's a big thing as well because those are things that cannot easily be motion captured. You're not motion capturing a dragon very easily. But as with art, something in very high demand in animation is tech animation. With tech animation, this is a lot about skinning and rigging of models. So if you're interested in those aspects of animation, definitely consider those parts of the industry when you're looking for a job. Audio, I'll talk about audio programming when I get to programming. Audio is interesting. Again, you'll hear it again and again and again. You want something in your portfolio. I think it's worth, with audio, including some compositions. If you are a composer, you're very unlikely to actually be composing the music for a AAA title because most AAA games go to external composers, but showing that you know how to work with music, either because you've done your own compositions or you've done your own arrangements, is definitely going to give you a leg up when it comes to getting a job in the audio field. Audio is fairly technical, so there isn't really tech audio. All of the people that are working as audio engineers are expected to be technical enough to get the job done. Design is a little bit harder to have a portfolio, so my number one advice here is make something. Make a game that shows what you are capable of, whether you have to do it in Twine or RPG Maker or something else that lets you show what you are capable of. This is the way to show what you can do and to set yourself apart from the rest of the candidates. A big part of make something is finish it, because if you can actually show a game that you finished, and even better, if you can show a game that you finished and put up on the Steam marketplace, even if it's not really that great, that shows that you're capable of bringing something into the finish line, and that's a huge feature when it comes to hiring a designer. I have to admit an ignorance about how effective the design programs at some of the game schools are, but to be frank, most of the recruiters you're going to be interacting with are going to be equally ignorant. So this is where, hopefully, if you're in such a program, it's providing you the opportunity to build things that you can use to demonstrate what you learned. Unfortunately, I don't think that piece of paper that you're getting as you graduate from a design program is going to get you very far at most studios. Going into the sub-disciplines here, level design is like the flip side of level art. It's about filling the spaces and building the encounters and making interesting gameplay out of the parts that exist. At some studios, level design actually does the layouts themselves, and then art comes in and set dresses them. At others, it's the other way around, where level art builds the space and then design works within the spaces they're provided. But in any case, this is a very iterative job where it's about a lot of communication and back and forth with the various stakeholders. System design is about the building blocks that make up the game itself. So combat design, the other parts of the game that you have around crafting or exploration. It can be quite technical, and in some of the modern engines that have very robust scripting systems, the difference between a systems designer and a systems programmer is largely only the programming language that they're working in. So here, having a engineering background of some sort is a benefit, because it's going to show that you have the technical bent. I still think that you are well served by having made something for system design. Here you can potentially have a very focused gameplay only kind of prototype that shows how you've built a self-contained piece of gameplay. Writing, I've pulled out of design. Sometimes it's lumped in with design. I feel like it's worth a section on its own, because probably more than 50% of all the questions I get about getting a job in video games is about video game writing. Probably because I'm from BioWare and there are a lot of writers at BioWare. So the bad news is there aren't a lot of jobs for writers in the video game industry. BioWare has a lot. Some of the other RPG companies have a lot. A lot of studios have zero and just have a producer kind of plaster some mediocre writing on top of the game to have there be enough there. Other studios have started to add writers, but writers in those cases are largely there to improve the quality of something that's already made. For writing within the RPG space, you need to have a sample that, well, you don't need. I strongly recommend that you have a sample built in some sort of interactive medium, whether that be Twine or the Dragon Age Origins toolset or RPG Maker. You need to be able to show that you can work in the interactive medium, because writing a screenplay and writing a branching conversation are not the same thing. You are much less in control of the flow of the dialogue, and showing that you can work with that lack of control is critical to the job. That said, if your writing is amazing, you might be able to get a job without showing that, but if you can show that, if you can show that you can work in the medium, that is critical to getting people to pay attention. Production is a hard one, because you're hard pressed to show this. If you've led a game jam team or you've been in leadership positions, these are great things to provide on your resume. as well as to show if you have a piece of software that can be shown. Production, more than any of the other disciplines, is probably driven by previous work experience a lot. So expect questions about the things that appear on your resume for this role much more than a lot of the other ones, so don't make anything up. Within production, you have three things. You have dev directors. These are also called project managers. These are the people that are focused mostly on the scheduling and task management. Here, if you have any particular training, definitely put that on your resume. PMP certification, while I don't think is particularly useful for the actual job, having it on your resume shows that you're serious about project management as a discipline and will help you get in the door. Producer is defined 9,000 different ways by every single studio. So it's a lot of about interpersonal skills. Again, if you can show that you have led teams in the past, that's going to help. If you can show that you can deliver on communication and vision, then that's also going to be immensely beneficial to this job. The reality is, for a producer, it's going to come down to how the interview goes and what they think of you in the interview itself. It's very hard, in my experience, to look at someone's resume and decide whether or not they are going to be a good producer or not. And honestly, not even after the interview is it always super clear. I put product manager under production, so my apology to product managers. Product management is a relatively new role. This is a role that's kind of a blend of producer and DD and systems designer. Product managers often exist on live products, and they lead the product and manage the product after it's released. This is a role that's coming from other parts of software. Here it is very much about being data-driven, showing that you can take data in, synthesize that to help make your decisions, and then make decisions based upon that. Pretty hard to put that in a portfolio, but backgrounds in statistics and other mathematical areas are certainly going to help you out here. A last form of production is the outsourced producer. An outsourced producer is leading teams outside of the building. In a lot of ways, they're not that much different than a dev director or a producer, depending on exactly what they're doing. But the one thing that sets them apart is that they're working with groups and people who are not direct employees. So the application of power is different. If you are interested in leading a very broad team across a large geographic space, this could be the job for you. It isn't going to look a lot different than the other production jobs, but a lot of it is going to come down to your personal preference. QA is obviously quality assurance. I'm not 100% clear on the process that is used for hiring of QA, but it largely comes down to three subcategories. Testers, who are the direct black box people playing the game. Here, honestly, your resume needs to show that you like games and that you play a lot of games. If you run a Twitch stream where you find exploits in games, that all by itself probably could get you a job as a tester. Analysts are more about the more analytical part of QA, figuring out test plans, figuring out testability. There is education involved in the QA field. Here, if you have a software engineering background, or you have that QA training, or if you've worked as a tester elsewhere, those are the kinds of things that are going to be needed to get these jobs. Often, analysts are promoted from within the QA ranks because these are the people that show an aptitude or an interest in learning more about QA as a discipline. Tech QA is the people that are building test suites, automated testing. This is a hidden engineering job, shall we say. If you are a programmer by training and you are interested in testing and automated testing and test harnesses and that sort of thing, Tech QA is an excellent place to look because it is another way to to become a programmer within a video game studio.
Before we move off of QA, I think it's worth mentioning that some studios treat QA as an entry-level position or a way to get your foot in the door. I don't like this because for me, QA is a career all on its own with progression and opportunities within the department itself. So my preference is for people who are interested in the craft and science of testing and QA to be the people that are applying for the job. But it's not universal to all studios, so I guess you do what you have to do to some degree on this one.
Going on to programmers more generally, or engineers, but I'm in Alberta and Alberta is very defensive of the term engineer. What I will say is if you have a 4-year degree from a reputable computer science program, you are basically qualified for an entry-level programming job at a video game studio. So that's good because it means you are capable of doing the job, but it's bad because it also means that there are tens of thousands of other people who are also qualified for the job.
So do you need a degree to get a job in the programming department? No, you absolutely do not. Some of the strongest programmers that I've worked with, the most talented, didn't have degrees at all. But it is going to be a lot harder for you to get through the screening process if you don't have a degree. It's good to remember that a lot of the screening process that happens before you get to the interview is just about culling the mass of applicants down to something manageable. So if you don't have the qualifications that most of the people around you have, you have to look for other ways to not be eliminated from the running.
Like with design, the single biggest thing you can do to get your foot in the door is make something on your own and show that you are capable of going through the entire process. Barring that, the next best thing to do is to focus on one of the subdisciplines that's not just a general programmer. UX, which I mentioned before, is a good place to go because it is going to be very much in demand, and you can also potentially be the UX designer on a project coming through the programming discipline. Graphics is the poster child of the high-end, math-focused programmer in the video game industry. These are the top level of programmers. This is going to come down to education. I've worked with a lot of graphics programmers who are PhDs.
That said, this is also where some of the most talented programmers I've ever worked with who didn't have degrees from a university or college also lived. So if you are good at this job, you're good at this job. You're just going to need to find a way to prove it.
This is also the group of people who end up doing a lot of other high-intensity programming jobs on the project. Performance, tracking down quantum bugs in the code. This is really going to come down to being able to talk to another graphics programmer and convince them that you know what you're talking about. Unless you are published, it's going to be pretty hard to show that you are up for the job, but I've seen it done. Audio programming is actually a role that is often in demand for two reasons. It's not a place where a lot of programmers actually show a lot of interest. So if you're interested in it, that's great. The other thing is because audio is already fairly technical as a discipline, people who are interested in audio but technical often end up being audio engineers as opposed to audio programmers. So if you are both a programmer and interested in audio, then you are relatively rare, and this is an opportunity to set yourself apart. Networking, like graphics, is a complicated specialization. Like UX designer, this is also a thing where the video game companies are competing with Amazon and Google for the best of the best. So if this is a place that you're interested in, the video game industry might not be the place that you're going to get the biggest salary, but it's going to be relatively easy for you to get your foot in the door.
Okay, some final thoughts on programming. Chances are at most studios you're going to have to do some form of programming test, either on site during the interview process or something they send you offline before the interview process. This is to sort of baseline your engineering and architectural skills. I'm not entirely sure that I would be capable of passing such a test these days. Actually, I'm pretty confident I wouldn't be able to. If you do send in a sample of a game or something that you built for a programming job, I'm tempted to say to not include your source code along with the sample. And here's why. Chances are, unless you're just incredibly lucky, you're going to violate their coding standard because you don't know what their coding standards are. And when they're evaluating your code, because you sent it to them, those violations are going to be these weird strikes against you for no particular reason. That said, if your code is very, very, very clever, I can see the argument for sending the code along. I don't know that you should necessarily take this piece of advice here, but just a thought.
So here's some other jobs you may not have considered within the video game industry that are also available. Any place that has writers should have editors, because if you're writing something, you want there to be editors. Editors are also going to be helpful for making sure that you are getting things ready for localization or voice acting or things like that. Within editing, you actually have copy editors, the sort of general, they're editing the parts of the writing that are in the game. And then you have technical editors who are more responsible for editing and maintaining your documentation for the game development. Technical editors are pretty uncommon within the video game industry at the moment, but having worked with some on Anthem, I think you're going to start seeing them more and more. Video editing is always in massive demand at studios because the number of video assets that you are generating is quite surprising. You have all of the trailer assets, of course, but you also have things for the community managers and for internal purposes, presentations, but also all hands for the entire company. All of these things require video editing. There really is room for at least one video editor at every single studio in existence, and most don't actually have a dedicated video editor. So if you are a movie maker looking to break into games, this is a great place to go. Business development is the group of people who are responsible for spreading the brand more broadly. They're going to be the ones that sign the book deals and get you action figures. If you are someone who has a business background, likes negotiating, has contacts, these are all ways to potentially work in this field. If you are capable of working in the business development field at a relatively senior level, chances are I don't need to tell you how to get that job. Marketing is centralized within EA, but not always. Sometimes they are embedded within the teams. Marketing is a discipline, a business discipline, so I suspect that this is going to largely come down to your education. However, I'll say it again, make something. If you want to show how a campaign for a game that you like could have been better or how you would have done it, that's a portfolio that you can show that shows what you are capable of, shows what you're capable of thinking of. Public relations, and I'll include community management in here, is very much about the interaction directly with the public. These jobs are from all over. Community managers are often hired from the community of the game they are going to represent. So if you want a job in community management, probably the best way to get that is to be an active member of a community so that you can show what you are capable of, show that you can keep your cool, show that you can interact with a wide variety of different people. IT, someone has to keep the computers on. Video game development is very technical in terms of the amount of hardware required. There are a lot of computers and you have a lot of different skill sets. You have people in some departments that are perfectly capable of ripping their own computer apart and putting it back together, and you have some people that are barely able to turn it on. So IT can be a very varied role within video games.
Honestly, my actual assumption is that IT is more afraid of the people who know what they're doing because they're the people that can do some real damage.
And there are lots of others that I'm not even naming here. You have other people that work within the studio and provide support, central groups, HR, and the like. I think this covers off the most game-facing disciplines. Hopefully I didn't forget any.
If it isn't super obvious, I haven't been that involved in hiring people in this section, the other section, which is why some of my recommendations here are pretty unbelievably vague.
With that, I'm going to just give some sort of general advice for applying for a job. Like I said several times throughout this video, make something, focus your portfolio, show that you can make the thing that you're applying for. In the case of art and animation, that is really about building a portfolio that is focused on the kind of genre that is being hired for. For design and programming, that's really about making a game, or at least part of a game, showing that you understand the restrictions of the medium and can work within them. But even for things like marketing, I think there is an opportunity to make something that shows what you are capable of. For your resume itself, I will say, you've probably heard this advice other places, don't make your resume longer than 2 pages. I know you think that your experience needs lots of nuance and you need a resume that's 4 or 5 pages long. If I was building a resume for myself, it would be 2 pages or less. And I have worked in the video game industry for 23 years. So keep it under 2 pages. It is a strike against you to submit a resume that is too long. I have interviewed people with longer resumes and they've gotten hired, but it's not helping your case at all.
Most of this video has been focused on getting into the industry in the first place. If you are applying to a studio having already worked at a different studio, then that experience is obviously invaluable on your resume. The only caveat I would put on this is if you worked in QA. In most cases, I would say still include that experience, because it still shows you know how to work on a team and ship a game and all that great stuff. At some studios, their attitude towards QA is so narrow that in those cases, including QA experience might work against you. So see if you can find out if they have that attitude. If you can't find out, I would say include it. Most studios aren't like that, but just a little warning flag there.
Include a cover letter focused to the specific job you are applying for. The cover letter should be talking about why you're excited to be working for this company and what you're looking for from the job itself. Again, keep it short, half a page, no longer, and then include whatever portfolio or other proof of your qualifications you have separately.
If you manage to get to an interview, then you should try to remember that the interview process is honestly more about figuring out what kind of person you are than it is about checking your qualifications. The resume and portfolio review is really more about that part. If you've made it to an interview, there might still be some skill checking and programming tests and things that happen in the interview process to check your skills, but really they're trying to figure out if they can work with you. Good companies that care about representation are shying away from simply looking for culture fit. Culture fit is basically code for people who are exactly like the people doing the interview, but even if they aren't doing culture fit, they're still looking for their ability to work with you. So they're going to ask you questions to see how you answer. It's not necessarily about what the answer is. It can often be about the process you use to answer the question, the interaction that occurs during the conversation. And if you're feeling like, why is this relevant? I'm just going to be in an office by myself, locked away, doing my work, and I'm so brilliant that I don't need to be able to interact with anyone else, then let me see if I can try to dissuade you of that. Video game development is an interactive and collaborative process, so there is a lot of task work, a lot of feature work that is built with poor specifications. And you might be thinking, well, just make everyone make better specifications. And yeah, there's something to that, but let me ask you this question. If I can build a specification that is good enough for you to do the task without interacting with anyone else, why would I have you do the task when I can have an outsourcer do the task for less than half as much money? The jobs that remain and have low risk of being outsourced are the jobs that have a high amount of interaction. Level art, which requires this back and forth with level design, is in high demand, where character art, which can be well specified through concept art, gets outsourced much more. So if you are someone that feels like you should be allowed to work by yourself in an office and no one ever talks to you, you may have difficulty getting getting in the door of a video game studio. That being said, there are ways to combat that, to figure out how to interact with people in ways that you may not find as stressful or that might work better for your particular personality type. If you are new to the industry, and most of this advice has been focused on people who are new to the industry, certainly don't shy away from applying to your dream company. But if that isn't working out, consider working with a smaller company, because in those cases, they might be paying less, but you might be able to get the experience and get something on your resume that will get you noticed by the company that you are more interested in working for. And frankly, what you might find is that smaller team at the smaller company is awesome. And maybe you never go to the bigger company with its more corporate culture. If you get to the interview, a question that I always ask is a two-part question. The first part is, have you played any BioWare games? Have you played any games of this particular studio that you're applying to? And if the answer is yes, then I follow it up with, well, what games have you played recently? And then given that, the question that I finally ask is, what would you do differently in that game? So let me break down why I asked that question. I don't actually care if you've played a BioWare game if I'm hiring you. I don't care if you've played one recently. I don't care if you've never played one at all. But what I care about is that you are able to talk about the experience you had. So you can see that there's some misdirection in this question. I'm not saying, prove to me you're a gamer. And I'm not really saying, show to me that you are able to critique and pick out points of improvement in this game. Though if you're applying for a producer job, I actually might be asking that exact question. But for other roles, what I'm really asking for is, can you have a conversation on this topic? And if you haven't played a BioWare game, then I'll ask you about a game that you have played recently. And if you don't play games at all, then we will pull a thread from something else that came up in the conversation to see if you can have a conversation on the topic. Because, like I said, there's a lot of collaboration in this industry. To be fair, most of the interviews I've done in the last 10 years have been for very senior roles. So in more junior roles, it might not be quite so much about your interpersonal skills. But again, this is a collaborative business. You need to be able to work with other people. If you are in a field that does not require you to work with other people, then you should be worried that your job is going to get outsourced.
Hopefully this was useful. It is something that is asked often of me, and hopefully this helps clarify things a little bit. I am at 40 minutes right now, and I realize that I am skimming off the surface, but if you found this useful, let me know. Special thanks to my members. They provide the resources this channel needs to keep running. If you found this interesting, give this video a thumbs up, because that will tell YouTube that there is interest in this video. If you have someone else that's looking for a job in the video game industry, maybe send this to them. Maybe this will help clarify things for them a little bit. Maybe you can send this to your parents to explain that Make It Video Games is in fact 3 entire columns of sub-disciplines. I hope you got some use out of this. I will see you again soon. Thank you.